all of you to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle that invites all of us to participate in a conversation on the topic for the week, which happens to be, since this is the week of Father's Day, taking up the subject of St. John of the Cross. As someone who served as a father to many, and St. John of the Cross celebrates his birthday this week, although it was many hundreds of years ago. And to present some ideas from St. John of the Cross, we have Mary, who herself comes from the Catholic tradition and who has spoken on that tradition previously. One of her more recent conversations with us was on, Mary, help me out, leper colony.
Father Damien.
Father Damien, yeah. So this is kind of a nice successor. Father Damien is certainly someone who had to encounter the darkness of a very difficult situation. And St. John of the Cross talks about the dark night of the soul, both of which ideas will prepare us for next week's theme of encountering the dark. So Mary, if you could give us a father's example, can you talk to us about St. John of the Cross?
Thank you, Renee. It was placed on my heart to open this presentation with a prayer. So I ask that the Lord will just open our hearts to receive whatever love He's giving to us, His children, and especially to our fathers, those who are here, those who are no longer in this realm, but with the Lord, and those that are to come, because without fathers, we wouldn't be here. So I ask that everybody just is at peace and in gratitude. And we are all His children, and we are grateful. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So it was quite an interesting thing for me to find out about St. John of the Cross, because I had really never heard of him. And the only St. John, well, there are two St. Johns that I had heard of, and one was John the Baptist, who was actually a cousin to Jesus and a contemporary of Jesus. And then the second one was St. John the Apostle, who was at the foot of the cross when Jesus was crucified. And Jesus gave his mother, the Blessed Virgin Mary, to St. John to be his mother and to be all of our mothers. And he gave John to her so that we are all her children. And ultimately, it is the love of God the Father for all of his children that we are striving for. So St. John of the Cross was an interesting, different time. He was born in Spain in 1542, and he died in 1591. So he was like, 49 years old. He wasn't old, but he was, he had a lot of influence on all those that he was around. Now, he was a Spanish priest, he was a mystic, and he was with the Carmelite order. And I had to look this up because there are so many different religious orders in the Catholic Church, and I wasn't sure what, the Carmelites were. So I did find that they were a religious order that strived to follow a group of hermits that they actually inhabited, or they were on Mount Carmel in Palestine in the 12th century. And they wished to live a life like Elijah, who was a hermit. And I'm going, okay, but I mean, any of the Carmelites that I know of, they don't, we don't have hermitages anymore that I'm aware of. So basically what it is they strive to absorb everything that God has taught, to pray for others, and to follow a life of not necessarily poverty, but they're not flashy and they do live a life of prayer. So that was what I found out about the Carmelites. And so St. John of the Cross was a Carmelite friar whose family was actually converted from Judaism. His family in Portugal and Spain were Jewish, but they converted to Catholicism in about a couple of centuries before he was born. So that was another new word that I found, converso, which means to convert. So when St. John was learning or trying to find his way, he was debating about following in a different order. And then he was mentored by St. Teresa of Avila, who is an older woman. And it amazed me because I heard she was not literate. She didn't know how to read and write, but she was very knowledgeable. And so she mentored him. And St. John of the Cross was especially known for his writings. And he did poetry. And he studied the development of the soul so that he could share how to get closer to God the Father. So what Renee asked me to mention the dark night of the soul. And what I found is that it is in fact a poem, and it touches on the trials of life and the Christian virtue of fortitude. And I guess it also delves into, the dark times that we all go through. Nobody is immune to tragedy or to hard times, but eventually the night changes to day and we have the light of day to fortify us. And so I was looking at what were involved in this writing that he did, and it says that while his story is full of virtue and struggles, he was also a man who had a sense of humor. And he was imprisoned by conflicting orders, or rather, certain religious orders didn't agree with other religious orders. And, we hate to think that, people who believe in God and who share God's love would do that to other people. But I guess, things happen. And so he was actually imprisoned and he escaped. And they said that when he got out and he was with other people, he was telling funny stories and he was sharing, amusing revelations that he found during that time that he was in prison. And what is remarkable is that he forgave his oppressors. And that is truly what God does. God the Father, he forgives us. He wants us to just be faithful to him. He loves us and we are his children, and he will always be our Father. He will never turn against us. So I thought that was really interesting. As far as the dark night of the soul, I I was, it's a long poem, evidently. And when I was just kind of looking through what it contained, I was amazed because it's actually in 2 books. And the first book talks about all of our imperfections, and it's basically how to deal with the 7 deadly sins. So just to give you an idea, he talks about the imperfections, and we start with the pride, avarice, the sin of luxury, and then the sin of wrath, of gluttony, envy, sloth, and then it says in the last chapter of the first book, he continues to show us what the night holds. And then in the second book, which is preparing to get through that dark night of the soul, he helps to walk us through. And it's very interesting. And I had never really seen this. And when I was also researching, it said that it's kind of, it's quite an interesting, but it's a hard one to get through also. And they said, people who I was reading comments, they said, you really got to read it. So that's one thing that that's going to be on a bucket list. But what I really loved, I enjoy, I just get so much satisfaction from little quotes that we hear. And there are a number of them attributed to St. John of the Cross. Strive to preserve your heart in peace. Let no event of this world disturb it. What we need most in order to make progress is to be silent before this great God with our appetite and with our tongue. For the language he best hears is silent love. So that's a recurring theme through all of John of the Cross's writings is love. And just a couple more. Love consists not in feeling great things, but in having great detachment and in suffering for the beloved. And I like this one. Beloved, all that is harsh and difficult, I want for myself, and all that is gentle and sweet for thee. I thought, oh, that is so wonderful. I mean, we all want that perfect love. And especially with Father's Day and all of the dads there, the dads that are having, living with their kids right now, and our dads who had to live with us and to guide us. We're so very grateful. So that's pretty much what I have to say about John of the Cross. Oh, there was the other one, because I wondered why is he called John of the Cross? Where does that come from? And so they said after a vision he has of the crucifix, in which his point of reference is from that of God the Father, the first person of the Blessed Trinity, he drew a sketch of what he kept in his mind. And it was an overhead view of Jesus hanging on the cross. And the image is striking and leaves a deep impression of the pain the victim surely suffered. And Salvador Dali did that exact painting. He did a painting of Jesus on the cross from above. And I had never made that connection. So now I know that in this image that John of the Cross had, he shows how Jesus suffered, and he did that for love of us. So I want to just send my love and blessings out there to all of our fathers, wherever they are, from the tops of their heads to the bottoms of their feet, inside and all around. Bless you.
Oh, oh, thank you so much, Mary. How lovingly given that presentation was. Well, if I could just do a couple little fill-ins, although Saint Teresa of Avila was perhaps illiterate herself, I understand she has so much mystic poetry. So it must have been other people who were writing down her poems as she spoke them. And I suppose not all the women got the advantages of education that not even all of the men got, but certainly a lot fewer women in the 1500s would have gotten. And yes, to comment on his influence, for example, to other artists like Dali, he also evidently has been hugely influential in Spanish literature. His writing evidently is so profound. It's interesting also that he's coming from a part of the world that was able to keep alive some of the older teachings. And so I think in about the 1200s, there was a really rich time in Spain. And a lot of the Muslims and probably Sufis were involved in that. And so they were keeping alive the writings of Aristotle and Plato and Pythagoras, for example, from older times, that some of the powers that be felt threatened by these older teachings. So they kept them alive to be rediscovered, for example, in the Renaissance. And so being from Spain, and there was this huge confluence, I think, there of the Muslims and also the Jews and also the Christians and Catholics. So being there, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he had been exposed to some of the Sufi mystic poetry that we've heard one of our participants, Fariba Entashari, talk with us about. And there's a lot of language referring to the beloved. God is the beloved. And so the mystic poetry is often love poetry, just this pouring out of adoration for the divine. And so it's so beautiful to hear. And did he not have, I don't remember what it was called, but something like a song celestial or something in addition to that dark night of the soul? I think he had a more joyous piece that he may have written as well.
There was, let's see.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, Mary, as you were studying about him, are there other people that you have heard about that have gone through this dark night of the soul, that they just feel as if really they don't even know if they're loved by God anymore? They don't, they this have this dryness, this aridness, and they just don't know where to even find their inspiration, and somehow they still make it through.
Yes, I have been told that certain of the saints um, go through periods where they question, is God really here? I just don't feel him. Personally, I am not somebody who senses things. I'm not jealous of of those who do, because I just am so happy to know that somebody else believes and is touched. I know that our Saint Teresa of Calcutta, for a number of, I don't know how many years, but she just felt that she didn't feel God in her life, but she continued to work with the poor in India. She did whatever she could, and that is a testament to her devotion and her obedience. I know that Damien, Saint Damien, he was had horrible times, horrible living conditions on Molokai and at Kalaupapa. So yeah, I'm sure that when we go through hard times, we really wonder, is there anything out there? God, are you there? Don't you hear my cries? And ultimately, I always think of when we pray, God has an answer. It's either yes, no, or later. And so many times we don't know why we go through difficult experiences, why we have trouble. And then years later, we look back on it and we realize that was a blessing. How many times I've heard of people who've lost a job and they struggle. This pandemic has been horrible for so many people. And out of some bad experiences, we have received the love of others. Sometimes we don't even know them, and they're ready to help, lend a hand, give a meal, pay something forward. And so I just take heart in that. It might not be now, but it will be eventually. And they say that God's plans are better than my plans. What he has in mind for me is better than what I can imagine, because he is our father and we are his children. And he does want what is best for us. And of course, like all kids, I don't want to do what dad says. I want to do my thing. And if we're lucky, we eventually come to the realization that, oh, yeah, dad was right.
I wonder what else other people would like to contribute, maybe along these lines of facing really difficult times, and what helps us to persevere. One thing that comes to my mind is just recalling other times that I've been through, or even more, that other people have been through that have been so much worse than anything I might have gone through, that they have persevered through and made it to the other side of. And so something about that, I think, helps to keep me going through some of my darker times, which, as I say, are nothing compared to many other people's. Just kind of remembering that there is light at the end of every tunnel.
If I may share something real quick, what I was thinking of. Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. By the way, I've never participated in this group, so I'm really happy to be here today. The topic, I think about that often because I myself do a Buddhist meditation practice, and it's spoken of the concept of karma. So, and I know that when I go through difficult times, physically or mentally, that I think of the concept of karma and what it teaches me in that moment. And I share with other people that do the same practice. And it's always that there's always a lesson in all these difficulties. And if the second I can see that and I can look inward, what it really does to me, I do get insights by the divine. Like the second I don't see, I don't victimize myself in that moment. And I'm asking for that lesson. I think divine existence gives us the insight, what we can see. And this is usually for me the moment when I do see the light at the end of the tunnel, or the lesson that I need to learn here. And I think the hardest times in my life were the most valuable when I think back on them now, where either it was like beloved ones that died, lots of loss that I have experienced. And again, other people experienced way worse losses than I have, but yet it was the loss that I needed to experience for my spirit to learn. So yeah, it was always the most valuable, and always proving, even though in that moment I can't maybe feel divine presence, after, when I do learn the lesson, I'm filled with gratitude, and I know, okay, that was exactly the one thing that I had to learn.
About the experience of knowing someone during a period of time when a huge upheaval happened, that I think, based on how a number of other people handled it, would have really shaken this person's faith. Just knowing what this person pretty well, probably to its very foundations, and may have rocked this person right off of their foundations. Just before this event happened, he, as a relatively young man, he was, I think, early 50s, and had a little son and wife. He just suddenly passed, just a sudden heart attack, and was gone. So he never had to go through that. I really think that would have been too much for him. And I always thought, what an interesting event. It seemed so terrible at the time to lose him. But then with the succeeding events that happened, I thought, it's a blessing. It's just completely a blessing. Because he would not have wanted to lose his faith. In a way, I think it could have happened. Of course, I don't know these things, but from the outside, it seemed like a blessing to me. And I don't know how his little son and his wife got through it, actually. But it does seem that we always have so much more insight after the fact, usually, than while we're going through these things. Adela, do you have any thoughts to share with us on the topic?
I know about St. John of the Cross through an artwork that was at the museum, and I knew he was a mystic, and it was an installation piece, and it had to do with the time that he was imprisoned, so that you entered a dark room, and there was a tiny little, I guess a prison, and you had to poke your head inside, and you could hear a recording of his love poetry. You're right. He did write all this love poetry, and so you could hear the love poetry in Spanish. There was a little table and a book, like a monk's cell, and then you couldn't enter it. It was so small because when he was in prison, he couldn't even stand up, but he had all of these out-of-body experiences. So his body was confined, but his spirit was free. And the whole room was dark, and they had on the video screen images of a mountain and the wind, and it was almost like his spirit was flying all over through these mountains, and yet his body was, I guess, captured in this small little room. And so that's what I thought. Unlike Mary, when I think about people who have experiences, I'm always jealous. I wish I was a mystic. I wish I could experience all of these things that are beyond my own experience. So that's my experience with St. John of the Cross. As for the dark night of the soul, you just go on. You have no choice. You could get up in the morning and you go on and you deal with it. You face it. You cowgirl it up, I guess. I don't know. I grew up Protestant, so I love Catholicism for its beautiful art imagery, for its saints, for its, all of that good stuff that Protestants, you sit on a hard bench and you look at a cross and, but I'm neither Protestant nor Catholic, but I think these are beautiful spiritual traditions. So that's my experience with St. John of the Cross.
Where was that installation, Adela?
Did you see that?
Where was it? No.
That was in a room at the Academy of Arts, a museum, Honolulu Museum of Arts. And it was in that far back room. So when you went in the room, all you could hear was the winds blowing through the mountains. You couldn't hear the love poetry. So you had to walk around and it was dark and you could hear the winds blowing. And then when you looked into that small room, you had to listen, and the poetry was being read in Spanish. So it was so beautiful. It was all this love poetry about the beloved, like Renee said. And you realize that, yeah, he had these out-of-body experiences, even though his body was confined. He couldn't stand up in that small space. So the mystic experience, wow, that's something. It's beyond my understanding.
What a beautiful description you gave for all of us, though, to experience kind of vicariously what you were able to see and hear and feel, and kind of have a broader sense of what was going on with his life. It sounds like it was an incredible installation.
Good artist, Bill Viola. Bill Viola.
I think he was at one point kept in a prison cell where I'm not even sure he was able to lie down. There wasn't enough room, but there was a tiny little window that if he stood up, he could just be able to read. I think he had his Bible probably, and so he just if he stood up. Well, maybe he didn't have any choice but to stand up. I can't quite remember the details, but it's quite a price to pay to have a mystic experience if that's what it took. Although I think that people, there are many circumstances in which people have these mystic experiences. Those who do have them, they come prompted by many different things. And Teresa of Avila's own poetry was, I think, mystic love poetry as well.
So, yeah, that's all.
Mhm.
Yep, you're right, Renee. She did not read or write, but people were always following her around. She had I don't want to say scribes, but like monks and they were always, I heard that they were always following her just to be able to capture whatever came out of her mouth. So we're very fortunate to have that.
We may have to follow up and hear about Teresa of Avila someday. There are not that many women out of that time that we have historic record of. So that would be something to remember. We should probably follow up with her. She's pretty incredible. Alice, I see your name. I'm going to assume that you're back there behind the screen. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
Just the experience, of handling things that happen that are bad, and may break your spirit. I think it definitely helps to have some sense, when I talk to people, the people who always, seem to be able to deal the best, have some sense, either through spirituality or their religion, that there will be some, in the end, a positive, that, like you said, this is, we have our trials in life and we may learn something from them. And then, I was actually talking with, I have a yoga teacher who comes to my house too. And we were talking about karma the other day, because just how some people can be so miserable and try to harm other people. And, how can they have a happy life and that kind of thing. And, she was saying that, sometimes you just have to think that, in life, there are different things and you don't know why everything happens the way it does. And these people who harm other people, in the end, maybe they will, learn something from it. So I personally, I just, by having faith that everything will turn out okay, that helps, that it's all gonna, in the end, if you live right and do well, hopefully in the end everything will work out. And that's how I just go on.
Yeah. It does seem as though the example that John of the Cross set by, for example, forgiving his oppressors. I mean, they were from his own faith, just a slightly different brand. And so he didn't burden himself with that blame. And one imagines that probably would have kept the light flowing through him in a way that it would not have had as much of a chance if he was just focusing all of that attention on blame.
I'd love to add a contribution here.
Please.
I was just listening to Adela describe that artwork and thinking about, Johanna, you at first mentioned having a practice, and thinking about just the importance of having a practice, like a meditation practice, some sort of spiritual practice, or like an artistic practice, or something that you do that is like a meaning-making container in some way. I feel like that is if I think about what has helped me in like the dark night of the soul, the dark times, it is that meaning-making container that, is like my daily practice, what I do to try to create meaning, what I do to make sense of what would otherwise feel like chaos, what would feel just like random events, that like somehow I'm going to turn to making something, or finding solace in other people's making, or finding solace in my own meditation practice, something that is regular, that I have cultivated. But that to me seems really key in terms of like, how do you survive this sort of thing? Any kind of dark night, any kind of, we all will go through something like that and have. But I was thinking in particular about, I had a friend who was fired from a job and many things happened, but I felt called to create a little ritual for him to like sort of say goodbye to his job and to have other people who were involved sort of be part of this event. Like it seemed important that like other people could witness something and be part of something together. And anyway, in the course of this event, he actually said that he was grateful that he was fired. And I mean, I feel like I sort of created this container for this to come out, in a way that was not just like a private revelation, but like he had witnesses. And I think that that's part of healing, or part of being able to flourish or find meaning and still be able to go on in very difficult times. That we somehow need this sort of container or meaning making thing, and we need each other. We need witnesses somehow.
What a beautiful thing you did.
That is so wonderful. And that is also a testament to, why do we gather for these groups? Why do we gather at Hula? Why are we at Still and Moving Center? It's because we've got community. We've got people that can support us. And I think that gets a lot of people through those dark times. And if we can, I know we're all busy, and if we can kind of like open our senses to other people, and if they're suffering like you did for your friend who was fired, that is so helpful. And that's a little spark of light. That's the saint in each and every one of us. It doesn't matter what religion we are, if we even have a practice, but we're all that wonderful little spark of life, of humanity that contributes to everybody else. And thank you. That's so wonderful.
Sharon, what can you share with us today?
I had two questions, and I guess one was brought up by Adela about mysticism in St. John, and she suggested Bill Viola, and so I looked it up, and I could see they have it on YouTube that you can go through the whole thing. And he was in a cell, and he wrote the poems, and he did not hold it. But I was always curious about him as a mystic and what happened there. And I had a question more than a statement about, if Mary knew or if he knew about it. And also it said that he also influenced Tom Merton. So, but I can see where, he's saying that maybe not so necessarily with a group, but like St. John was by himself and isolated in a cell, and he was still able to experience it. And instead of being negative or feeling oppressed, he expressed love poems instead, so gave good. So being isolated sometimes is a good thing, because it brings out and reaches out to you. And I remember when my mother was very ill and she couldn't care for us, and I had to go, I think I told Mary in one of her talks that I had to live at Sacred Heart's Convent with the nuns. And so I wasn't a Catholic, but I had to go live like a nun there. And but I felt a great love there. And so it's sort of like being a cell, not being not having somebody to, like, my mom wasn't there to help me or anything, but to have a feeling, a strong sense of love or feeling that came to me, that reached out. And I felt like in that Viola thing, that's what it was like. for St. John in the cell. And that's how he was able to produce the love poems. And that's, but I want to know more about his mystical side, because they said at that time of period, they didn't know what that was, but he probably was a mystic. So I was always curious about St. John and how he's associated with that, and also with Tom Merton.
I read that Thomas Merton was inspired by him, and they share the same faith, but that's as far as I know. Greg, what were you thinking?
When speaking about the dark night of the soul and, you know, just the struggles that we may go through in life, it's interesting because we're pretty much one with this planet, and we go through the same type of cycles. And I think in my own personal struggles, I don't remember when exactly this happened, but I liken the struggles to storms that come and then storms that go. And there's times where, you know, it seems like the storm will never end, and it's very trying, but the realization is that it will pass, and it will ultimately be more beautiful on the other side of that storm. And I found a little bit of, I don't know, like, that always stuck with me, that kind of comparison to the things that we go through in life. And like, you know, there's tough times, but you know, it will pass. And, you know, you almost have to be strong in that to allow those things to do what they do, to learn from them so that it can pass and you can learn what you had to learn when you went through it. And I'll end by saying there was an interesting parallel early in my career. A gentleman that I work with, you know, we were talking, and he was like, he could see the frustration in my face because I was trying to do good. I was trying to get better. And, you know, he's like, you know, Greg, a lot of time, you know, it does get hard and you are trying your best and all this kind of stuff. But a lot of times it's not really how good you are. It's more about how long you last. And in that saying, it's like, you know, it's going to be difficult. That's what life is. There's not a time where you're just going to be in the best place every moment of the way, but you can't lose your footing or your confidence, because if you last through all that, it's going to make you stronger and going to make that foundation that much more sturdy. So I think that's, you know, the darkness of it, they always say the night is darkest just before the sunrise. So, you know, it's one of those things, I believe. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And don't you feel as if something, I think I've heard of kind of like a softening of the soul that people experience after going through extremely difficult times. There can be so much of a compassion for others, an understanding of others that they may not have had beforehand, that we may not have had beforehand, of having gone through these things ourselves, so that maybe we're a little less judgmental, maybe we're a little less impatient. There's a kind of change in our characters, it seems like, when we go through these things and assimilate them, rather than just going through them and casting them away. For example, I think, Johanna, you mentioned when you felt victimized, when you felt yourself, oh, I'm a victim, it's difficult to be thinking, oh, but I learned something from this. As soon as you change into that, oh, what do I have to learn? All of a sudden, you're not a victim anymore. Did I get that correctly from you?
Yeah, that's very much the basic of the practice that I do, that you always see the lesson and you do not victimize yourself in any situation, and knowing that everything happens for a reason, even the worst things. So there's no such things as, it's hard to believe often when it's like, okay, my whole world turned around, I lost everything. A lot of people lose everything. And then you cannot say to that person, okay, that happened for a reason, because the pain is too great. But it really does happen for a reason, everything, I think. And it took me a long time, like, to maybe, it's still sometimes I catch myself victimizing myself because it's a process. I don't think it just, we like, the wisdom doesn't come so quickly, but that helped me through those times the most, that I like really get quiet, I do my meditation, and then I really ask for the guidance through this and wanting to know what is it in me, because in the practice that I do, I love that, because they say the universe has material existence, but it also has a characteristic. And in the practice that I do, it's truth, compassion, and tolerance. And so when things don't go right for you, you experience like everything, conflicts are so sharp, or you lose a lot. And it is said that there's something inside of you where you're not really quite in tune with these cosmic principles. And the way I try to handle it in that moment is to realign with them and ask, where can I learn more truth and compassion and tolerance? And usually when I do ask that question, the load on my heart goes away. The situation may still be the same, but the load on my heart fades more, and I get to see better what's for me. And the situation might still be the same, but it's really like, I want to grow. I want the growth in it. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Sarah, thank you for tuning in. Did you want to make a comment? And then I'm going to ask for David after you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Mary, and everyone. Johanna, what you just said lastly really, really resonates. It's like taking myself out of that seat of the victim of, why is this happening to me? And being able to see, how is this happening for me, not for my ego sense necessarily that is trying to cling on to everything, but my spirit or my soul. And if I can shift that gaze, everything, even the hardest things, have that potential, because ultimately I know I'm going the same place everyone else goes, ultimate in terms of leaving this earth plane. And so whatever degree of suffering, whatever colors kind of are painted in this time of being in this plane, it will be the whole vast diversity or whatever it is, but ultimately I know that it ends. So in a way, there's also this understanding that no suffering is eternal, in at least in my belief. Maybe yes, people can go to eternal suffering, but if we choose to grow, and we choose to grow into deeper compassion, deeper love, and the hardest things always have their way of just opening more of that. So they're a blessing in that sense, very much. Thank you.
Such cheerful sounds behind you with that bird. That bird seems to be agreeing with you and what you're saying right now. David.
The topic and the conversation brought up many things. One is just how diverse, or how that humans can be so generous and so kind and loving and compassionate, and at the same time can be just so horrific. And these lessons that we've talked about are how these horrific situations have produced the most beautiful, loving kindness out of them. And it's like the nature that bones heal stronger than before they were broken, and that kites only rise when they're against the wind, and that we progress through these trials and tribulations. And it seems like the greater the tribulation, the greater the loving output, certainly in this case of St. John of the Cross. And so I think underneath that, maybe the lesson for me is about taking more risk. Like, if we know that we jump into the deep end, it's scary, and we might fail. But every failure seems to have these beautiful lessons attached to them. And I think in some way, the whole message is about being willing to have the courage to dive in, even though it's scary and has the potential for for big troubles. That something beautiful will emerge from it, even through the failure. And we talk about that in our yoga practice, particularly in balance poses. Is you learn so much when you fall out of a pose, probably more than you do by staying in. So this business of playing it safe, hiding your little light, but let your light shine. So that's what came to me.
Oh, it's a beautiful, really a closing thought for us. I want to lend a little bit of continuity of consciousness by mentioning that Johanna, who's been with us today and sharing so beautifully, is going to be with us next week when we do actually talk about encountering the dark. And with her will be someone named Charles Wei, W-E-I. Both of them have been practitioners of Falun Gong, and so this meditative practice from the Buddhist and Taoist traditions. And Charles Wei was in China, where there is great oppression by that government, and he spent 6 years imprisoned for his practice, and has made it out the other side. And I believe he's in the Los Angeles area also. So someone who's truly encountered the dark, who hasn't just heard about being in a small prison cell, has experienced it, and so should have a lot to share with us, along with Johanna's insight on it as well.
Yeah, thank you for announcing this. Just one sentence. I think meeting him is very valuable. I met him a year ago, and he was almost tortured to death. And so the way he handled the imprisonment, and how he did not, he forgave his oppressors in a way. His dignity is so great, and his presence is so dignified that just like talking to him, I think there's so much to learn. So I'm feel very honored and happy to be able to introduce him to this group, knowing that, okay, today was the topic very similar to like encountering dark, and then him sharing his story, I think is extremely valuable.
Yes, we're looking forward to it very much, Johanna. Thank you. And I want to particularly thank Mary, who is certainly a lifelong learner, had not really even heard of St. John of the Cross, and still said, yes, I will give this presentation. And to dive in with that kind of courage that David mentions, and to come through with such a beautiful presentation for us, and so many helpful comments along the way too, is something that we all really appreciate. So thank you so much, Mary.